Welcome to Scoop, where you get the scoop on this week's news. My name is Jenna, and this is Smarter News. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Scoop. It is Monday, December 15th. I am so glad to see you as we're easing into the final weeks of 2025, 10 days out from Christmas. And I see here that Tara really puts it well. She's joining us on our live chat with our Scoop insiders that support Smarter News. And she says this: the last 36 hours have been brutal. We were talking about the news in our before show. We have very little control, obviously, over the headlines and what stories pop up for us. The best that we can do here at Smarter News is try to make these headlines a little bit more approachable so we could wrap our arms around even the tough stories and have clarity as to what transpired. I find that a little bit of clarity, a little bit of decluttering makes these news stories less stressful. But the constant inundation of images and video and all of the voices around the variety of stories that we have as we ease on into this week can be very overwhelming. So the goal for today is back to our roots, quick, concise, nonpartisan news. This is our time when we're a little bit more long-winded than quick, but sometimes the stories deserve that. And that's where we are today. We have a terrorist attack in Australia. We have a shooting at a university here at home in the United States. We have breaking news from the Department of Justice of a terror plot foiled here at home. We're going to get to it. It just came out over an hour ago, and we have the latest for you on that. We have the unfortunate news of two service members who have been killed in Syria from an attack that is being tied to a terrorist group, ISIS. So we have a lot to go through, and these are dark stories. I never want to categorize news as good news or bad news. It's up to you. But to say that these stories are dark is not, is perhaps even an understatement, really. And so we're going to do, again, just methodically go through each and every one of them. For those of you joining live, we look forward to your questions. And we're going to get started in just a moment. Before I get to that, I do think this is worth just flagging for you. I talked about one of the words of the year being rage bait just a few podcasts ago. Well, we have a new word of the year from Merriam-Webster, and it relates to what we're talking about today. So Merriam-Webster, by the way, I don't know if you follow them on Instagram. They're worth a follow. I don't know about these comedians that are running these accounts, but they are hilarious. They are lighthearted, and you actually learn something from them. And it's like a whole new realm of social media. Have you noticed that? Whether it's the National Park Service or dictionaries, they're suddenly hot again, guys. And it again is worth a follow just to see what they're talking about every single day. Play on words and the rest of it. You're going to sense a little bit of it here. It's a more lighthearted take on those dictionaries than we've ever seen in the past. So 2025 word of the year is slop. Slop. You might think slop, that's kind of an outdated term. In which case I would say, yeah, I think about slop related to cleaning out like a pig pen, like Charlotte's Web sort of slop, right? So the original sense of the word in the 1700s, I'm reading here from Merriam-Webster, was soft mud. In the 1800s, it came to mean food waste, as in pig slop, and then more generally, rubbish or a product of little or no value. And so what does it relate to today? Well, that's Merriam-Webster speaking, define slop as digital content of low quality that is produced usually in quantity by means of artificial intelligence. All that stuff dumped on our screens, captured in just four letters. The English language came through again. It is describing slop as all this extra clutter developed by AI. Reading here continues in 2025, amid all the talk about AI threats, slop set a tone that's less fearful, more mocking. The word sends a little message to AI. When it comes to replacing human creativity, sometimes you don't seem too super intelligent. A little sass there from Merriam-Webster. We'll take it on a day like today. Slop is, geez, there's really nothing that replaces the word slop. You really get an image of it. And maybe that is what we're seeing online, a whole lot of slop. So we're going to consider what we're doing today, a clearing out of that, because we have very real news in front of us. And hopefully we're not going to be handling a whole lot of slop. And I wish that for you for the rest of this holiday season as well. So let's start with one of the big headlines. First, we're going to start overseas and we're going to work our way back to home. And part of the reason for that is we have a special guest joining us today. Holly McKay is joining us live, which is a rare treat. As many of you know, Holly is a war correspondent, writer, journalist. She is a published author. And in one of her books specifically, she sat down with the terrorist group ISIS. And this is going to come into play specifically for some of the stories that we have in front of us today. But maybe a little known fact about Holly, that you may notice from her accent, that she was born and raised in Australia, and that's where our headlines take us to Bondi Beach in Australia, where a terrorist attack took place over the weekend. And I just would love to get oriented, Holly, on that. Can you tell us a little bit about this part of Sydney and what it would be like on a Sunday afternoon where there's a festival, the beginning of Hanukkah is taking place?
Mhm.
Walk us through what sort of scene would we all walk into if we were at the beach on that day?
Absolutely. Well, remember that Australia is the southern hemisphere, so it's summertime there, opposite season. So you're sort of talking about peak time there, where it's beautiful weather, summertime, hot weather. So as you can imagine, I mean, Bondi on a cold day is still pretty busy. So on a summer day, a nice day, it is usually pretty packed, especially on a weekend. And yet Sunday was gorgeous weather, so many people were out doing various things. Bondi is a very famous, I think, one of the most famous beaches in Australia, and not only sort of a very kind of touristy area, but it's got really great surf. So often a lot of the pro surfers will be there. It's just got lots of shops, it's got lots of restaurants, beautiful walks that you can do from kind of beach to beach going all around. So it has a bit of everything. And it's sort of a very multicultural place. You'll see a lot of locals there as well as visitors from all kind of corners of the globe. And it has a very unique vibe to it. Last year, I took my husband and daughter there for the first time, where we went home to see my family at Christmas, and we went to a lot of the beaches, but we kept going back to Bondi just because even though it is touristy, it just has just a very special vibe to it. So yeah, a weekend in Bondi Beach is kind of a must do if you ever get a chance to visit Sydney.
Well, that is very helpful to just get oriented with what this place means for the local community, but also what it means for Australia overall. When you saw the headlines, because you, like us, were far away, there's a huge time difference. When you first saw the headlines, terrorist attack, Bondi Beach, what went through your head? What were you looking for first?
Well, I think there's always a shock that comes when you hear these things, and just a very sickening feeling. My sister and my nieces and my family lives very close to there. So, obviously you want to check that they're okay, that they weren't there. Um, and then, just sort of who is behind this and how does this happen? And I think that's where my investigative journalism brain kicks in, having really covered countless terrorist attacks, both abroad and in the United States. And so I guess my brain just kind of goes into that mode of trying to figure out what happened and why it happened, and trying to put pieces of a puzzle together, which yeah, isn't always easy from 9,000 miles away.
Sure, easier said than done for any of these particular cases too. When they come up, we want answers right away. They can be hard to find. What we now know today, which is still very limited, is that it was a father and son duo that opened fired on this crowded beach where presumably, Holly, wasn't a lot of people walking around armed. Can you talk to us about that part of Australia too? Because
Yeah.
it's going to come up a little later about gun laws and how difficult it is to acquire a gun. Although I've seen some mixed reports on that. Would there be a lot of security on the beach, on at Bondi? Would there be people walking around that would have guns if they were private security guards?
Right. No, the short answer is no, unless you're a police officer. Yeah, there's not. Self-defense isn't considered a reason to be a gun owner in Australia. So, Australia has some of the strictest gun laws in the world, and that kind of came into play. I remember when I was a small girl in primary school, there was a really horrific massacre in Tasmania, at a very touristy spot in Tasmania, where a deranged guy went and killed, I think it was more than 50 people. And so there was a big outcry over that, and a huge crackdown, a big gun buyback program. And that all sort of fell into place very quickly. And I know that wouldn't fly in the United States, but Australia didn't have the sort of same gun culture that the US has. You know, it's not part of the Constitution. So it's sort of a different, I guess, sentiment around it. And then, you know, for better or for worse, you know, Australia was sort of looked at as this model of a place that for 30 years basically didn't have a mass shooting up until the weekend, which was obviously the worst mass shooting since the Port Arthur massacre, which I think was around 1997. And so then there's a lot of questions of, well, and even for me, you know, how is this man sort of legally licensed to own 6 firearms, which, you know, I guess made me question a lot, just in terms of how he got it. And I actually talked to my cousin, who's a police officer, and she said that they are extremely strict about who they give these to, and that really, you know, the only way that you can kind of get around the laws is to be part of a gun club. So if you can prove that you're a member of a gun club, or another step was basically, you know, if you have a business owner that has sort of vermin or but in an urban environment, which these alleged shooters were, that's why I was very confused as to sort of how they obtained these, because they weren't on a rural property where I think that you have much more of a reason to be a gun owner. So that I think is going to come out and be somewhat interesting, because we just don't know how that happened and how he managed to have 6, because that again is a process. You're allowed to own 1, and then they're very stringent about where police will sort of randomly come to your house and check that it's being stored correctly. So,
oh, that's interesting.
So that is why I think we're seeing a lot of headlines, my personal opinion, why we're seeing a lot of headlines that he was known to the intelligence services in Australia, but not for nefarious reasons. And you're like, well, why would somebody be known to intelligence services but not have a concerning record? And I think that was because being a registered gun owner, you are subject to sort of these random checks to make sure that your guns are stored safely.
They're
so
not
that's function.
They're not being super clear about that. So just so we do a big overview for our audience. So you have these 2 individuals, a father in his 50s, a son in his early 20s. The father's been in Australia for decades. The son was born in Australia. There's no known ties to a terrorist group from what we're hearing from officials right now, meaning that they haven't said, oh, they were inspired by X, Y, and Z. We've heard a variety of different reports, but they haven't, at least at this point, said this is the group and this is how this happened and here's how this plan came together. We have virtually no details on it. They opened fire on a crowded beach at a Hanukkah by the Sea celebration that is taking place. Feels like a festival. There's face painting. There's a petting zoo. There's kids. There's families. They're celebrating the start of the Jewish holiday that's occurring on that day. So we have that motivation for timing, but we still don't have a very clear motive, although it would seem rather obvious that this particular group of people is being targeted, and officials are saying such. This is an anti-Semitic terrorist attack. Now, there is information about the father being a gun owner and having this license for 10 years. And there's mixed information about whether or not he was the person known to officials or his son was known to officials. And that came up a couple years ago, but you're not getting clarity. Here's from the latest press conference. I'm going to play this for us, Holly. This is, let me look up because there's so many different names. The police commissioner, Mal Lanyon, in the area. He's standing next to the premier of New South Wales. We're going to come back to him in a second, Chris Minns. And the journalists are asking about this gun situation because they're giving him nothing on any terrorist ties. But we know about the laws in Australia, so they're very curious about this. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
Was he granted a firearms license?
I can't answer that question.
Do we have that information? Okay, Commissioner.
Because he met the eligibility criteria for a firearms licence. So the firearms licence was to be for a recreational hunting licence. There are 2 types of hunting licence, the ability to hunt on a property or also as part of a hunting club, so a gun club. He was a member of a gun club and was entitled, by nature of the Firearms Act, to have a firearms licence issued.
Commissioner, which gun club was that?
Pardon?
Do we know which gun club?
I don't have those details with me at the moment.
Commissioner, just for detail for our private security.
What category of gun licence did he hold? I understand different categories allow you to register different types of firearms.
He had category A/B licence, which entitled him to have the long arms that he had as registered firearms.
Commissioner.
So you could get a little bit more detail for all of us. Gun club, what license for which guns? There's a lot to follow because it's new to us. When you hear that, Holly, what goes through your mind from the police commissioner?
Yeah, as I said, I guess in small pockets, but firearms aren't sort of the same. Don't have the same sort of cultural place that I guess that they have in the United States. So gun clubs are not something that are very common, but obviously exist. And that, as I mentioned earlier, is a provision for owning a firearm. But for example, you can't buy a pistol and be a concealed carry holder. I don't even believe that you could own like an AK-47 or an AR-15. I don't believe that you're able to do that as a civilian. But in his case, he's able to own shotguns and particular hunting rifles for that purpose.
And so
which
then
is also going to come under scrutiny now too. And it's again, it's debatable. Are we asking the right questions?
Well, and that's what I was going to get to. You have 16 people who have been killed, including one of the gunmen. The father was killed. You have more than 40 people injured, and we're still trying to wrap our heads around such a large terrorist event because we haven't seen one quite like this. Certainly not in Australia for many years. But with that question of, well, what is the terrorist group that has motivated this? What happened here? Because the guns are part of the story, but is there a broader story about the terrorist groups and their ideology continuing to inspire attacks like this, if that's indeed what happened, and it's not just, a father-son duo one-off that decided to take this action because they're crazy, they're mentally ill. Like there's more to the story. You've sat down with ISIS in your book, Only Cry for the Living. You did that in Syria. You've met face to face with these ISIS terrorists. And I mentioned that because that's a terrorist group that keeps on coming up. We're going to talk about it in Syria in a moment. We're going to talk, just so people know, there's a thwarted terrorist plot in Europe that's also coming up. So we're hearing the term ISIS again. I don't know if that's the group at the center here, as some reports are indicating it. What do you think about that, Holly? The ability for terrorist groups to still reach into people that, the son was 24. So is very young as far as understanding the evolution of these terrorist groups over the last 3 decades.
Yeah. And I think, to Australia and many parts of the, world of the West have experienced quite an uptick in, particularly anti-Semitic attacks since October 7th. But I think the biggest danger in these cases aren't necessarily attacks that are orchestrated by ISIS, where an ISIS commander in XYZ says, recruit somebody to go and carry out a specific attack. I think the biggest danger is what they call lone wolf attacks, which is where individuals are inspired by the group's ideology or maddened by something happening, and it's sort of a self-radicalization process. And then they go and carry these attacks out. And these are much harder to sort of foil by intelligence services than groups, that are communicating with figures overseas. Because typically, especially in the Five Eyes intelligence community, which Australia is part of, those things will often, agencies are very good at intercepting those kind of communications and putting a stop to attacks before they happen. But in these sort of lone wolf situations, they're much harder to kind of surveil, because if you have a father and a son and they're sitting at home plotting these attacks without any sort of electronic communication or any revelation to people in the outside community that may report it, then we don't have cameras inside people's homes, so it's very hard to know what is sort of happening and to foil these things before they happen.
Well, and to understand the strength of the ability of these ideologies to still inspire those lone wolves, and what does that look like, especially in the technological space that we're all in. Before I move on to what's going on in Syria, because we are going to go there in a moment, I just want to share this photo, because this is the man known as Ahmed, as the way that the premier who's sitting next to him, with the premier in Australia, the premier of New South Wales, is that sort of like the state representative?
Governor,
the governor. So
that state.
I feel it's for me to say premiere. It feels very. I don't know. I don't know why. It just feels like so different than what
Commonwealth.
we have. Yes, this is Chris Minns. He's sitting next to him here, and this is the person, as many of you likely have seen on a viral video that shows a man coming up behind what's believed to be the father and grabbing him and grabbing the gun from him and thwarting at least part of the attack there. Although it continued for some time after that. We don't want to forget this part, Holly, that we saw these Australians too, when they didn't have the security around them or the law enforcement around them, take matters into their own hands. And he's one of them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think at this point, many of us have seen that viral video of this Syrian gentleman sort of hiding behind a car and then kind of finding the right opportunity to run out and tackle the shooter and get his gun off him, which is absolutely a remarkable act of bravery. I mean, just to have the willingness to do that and to confront him like that. And mind you, that is also putting yourself at huge risk of being mistaken for the perpetrator as well and potentially being shot by police. And I see a lot of rhetoric on Twitter. Why didn't he shoot him? Why didn't he do, armchair rhetoric? But that could have rendered that him in a lot more trouble. We don't know, and I think he did what he felt was right in that situation, was to get the gun and then put the gun down and ensure that the attacker couldn't access that firearm anymore. And again, just a really, really remarkable act of bravery, and to sort of see that from someone else who was also an immigrant, I think is an important part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that we want to highlight because in this time when there's a lot of the scary news out there, the fact that just your average neighbor could come forward and help save lives it's just a reminder of the goodness that exists out there that we can't forget. Now, that's going to be hard to transition to this next story because this was something also unexpected this weekend. We have not heard of U.S. service members in the last year or so. You have to be careful because there can be training injuries. We have seen a smattering of attacks over the years in the Middle East in a variety of different ways, including some targeting through the air, but we haven't necessarily seen something quite like what is being described in Syria. And I want our audience to know that the initial reports, I don't want to say downplayed, but we're getting more of an understanding about what happened and that there's other injuries involved. So I'm going to read to you directly from the Iowa National Guard about the information that we have thus far. There were 2 service members who were killed this weekend in Syria. And we're going to talk to Holly a little bit about, well, what is the U.S. doing there now? But here I'm just going to read from this release. In accordance with the Department of War Release Authority, the Iowa National Guard is releasing the names of 2 soldiers who were killed in an enemy attack on Saturday, December 13th in Palmyra, Syria. The deceased soldiers are Sergeant William Nathaniel Howard, 29, of Marshalltown, Iowa, and Sergeant Edgar Brian Torres Tovar, 25, of Des Moines, Iowa. Both were members of the 1st Squadron, 113th Cavalry Regiment. The 3 other Iowa National Guard soldiers were wounded in the attack. This is the new information. 3 others wounded. 2 of the soldiers required medical evacuation for further treatment and are in stable condition. The 3rd soldier has been treated locally and is in good condition. Their names are not going to be released. And just so we understand, Operation Inherent Resolve is why these National Guard soldiers were in Syria. This is the mission to advise, assist, and enable partner forces against ISIS. So I think for some listening to this, Holly, just knowing that our soldiers are still in Syria might be a surprise because we've been moving soldiers all over the place, obviously, over the last 2 decades. But what's your understanding as to what is America's role right now, and what have you seen about this particular attack that stands out to you?
Well, since 2014, the U.S. has had about 2,000 troops in Syria, so under the official cover of fighting ISIS or preventing ISIS from gaining territory again. That's obviously been a contentious topic of whether troops are still needed there. About 6 years ago, ISIS was defeated sort of territorially from the cities and the villages that it controlled, but certainly it didn't go away. It's still quite a menace. It's a little bit more like a militia now, where it has certain cells in different areas and still carries out a number of attacks. And mind you, a number of Syrians are frequently killed by ISIS. We just tend to not necessarily hear about it. And in this case, we are hearing about it because it does involve 3 Americans. But I think that it is going to raise continual questions of, is this deployment sort of still worth it? What are the pros and cons of it? Obviously, the relationship now is a lot different between Damascus and Washington, where they do have close cooperation. So my, I guess, immediate hunch is that I don't think things will necessarily change anymore to the point where ISIS is a real threat. So therefore, I think many people see it as a U.S. presence being especially necessary.
Interesting. That's Raven in the background, just so everyone knows. That's Holly's daughter. It's not just
Doesn't
some
like to sleep. Yeah.
wayward child. She's not just wayward child, like somewhere walking down the hallway. Holly, do you need to get her? Because you totally can.
No. She's going to fall asleep eventually.
Spoken like a veteran mother here who's saying, sleep tight. I actually just have one more question for you, and I'll let you go. As always, so generous with your time. As ISIS, so there is some reporting. This is from the Long War Journal. It's a resource that I've used often that suggests that this person that opened fire on these individuals was a member of the Syrian security forces, and that he was already under investigation for quote unquote extremist ideas. But the people that are in power now in Syria, Holly, were one time labeled terrorist groups in the past. So that's created a strange bedfellow between the United States and now those in power. And now this idea of who has the extremist views and who's being, part of the security apparatus that's interacting with U.S. soldiers. What does that surveillance look like? How safe are our soldiers on the ground? And also, what's in it for the United States to put people at risk? Like, what is that really about? So there's a few different questions in there, including what is our priority in Syria? But in just going back to the previous point that you made, do you see ISIS as being able to recalibrate and gain and a force in the Middle East, or do you still see this as sort of these one-offs still that are just sort of a whack-a-mole attack trying to defend against?
I don't necessarily see right now ISIS being able to take cities, towns, villages, the way that it did in the past. But I certainly see it as a very legitimate threat that can cause a lot of problems and wreak a lot of havoc and claim lives. And as we were just talking about earlier, I think one of the biggest dangers is their ability to inspire all around the world. And they kind of need that fortified presence in as many countries as they can get it in order to continue to encourage people to carry out these heinous attacks. So I do think that ISIS still represents a very significant threat to America, to the world, to our national security interests.
It's every once in a while we sleep on those stories regarding terrorists because they're just not in the news. It's not the same sort of news cycle that we've had before. And the stories in the last weekend remind us about the very real threat and how quickly things can change. Tara Hennessy says, as a mom who works from home sometimes, I love hearing Raven, Holly. So just so you know, there's room for Raven here. And we're glad to have her and always glad to have you. So thank you for the time today, Holly, as always.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Smarter News.
All right, we're going to turn back closer to home. Very much grateful for all of Holly's insight and what she's able to bring to the table. And if you haven't checked out her book, Only Cry for the Living, this is a really important piece of work because while many journalists, including myself, have talked about ISIS or talked about terrorist groups, and we're really doing it from afar, we're not on the ground interacting with these terrorist groups. Holly was on the ground in Syria, interacting directly with these terrorist leaders fearlessly, and going into these areas that many journalists did not. And so it is a really important, pivotal piece of work that I think will only gain in value as we think a story or a chapter has closed. We know that the story continues in ways that we cannot anticipate. And so if you're curious about Syria, if you're curious about what do we need to know about ISIS, how to prevent, what is the insight that we could gain from what they're thinking, which may sound like, well, why do we want to be curious about that? Well, we want to be curious about that because what is it about their mission, their mantra that continues to be attractive to others? And we know in this particular case, it seems that according to the reporting, this was a factor in this attack on U.S. service members in Syria. And there's all sorts of reports that are suggesting that that was part of the attack in Australia, although we do not have it confirmed at this time. So this is why I'm leaning into it a little bit. We're seeing the reporting, but we want it from officials, of course. Speaking of reporting, and I just want to mention this to you, we're going to do it very briefly back here at home. This actually has nothing to do with ISIS, but we got news early this morning on Monday morning that the Department of Justice said that there was a thwarted terrorist attack that took place in California, and that a group was gathering in order to commit a terrorist act going into New Year's. And so we have the latest press conference, a portion of it from Bill Asaley. He's a U.S. attorney based in the Orange County area. And I want you to listen to what he has to say about what transpired.
Over the weekend, my office, along with the FBI, arrested members of a far-left, anti-government domestic terror cell who self-identify as the Turtle Island Liberation Front. The individuals were arrested on Friday, December 12th, when the group attempted to construct and detonate IEDs out in the desert. In addition to the arrests, we executed several search warrants throughout the nation. Last Friday, December 12th, the defendants took a significant step to carry out their plans. They traveled to the remote campsite, which you're going to see some video of, in the desert, and they began unloading their bomb-making materials to assemble and test the bombs. They had everything they needed to make an operational bomb at that location, and they were subsequently arrested by the FBI before they could build a functional explosive device.
So this press conference goes on for about 30 minutes. We're still gathering information as to what transpired here. There was a report that there was an additional arrest made in New Orleans. It's a little difficult to wrap our hands around. Well, what exactly is this group? What they're being described as an anti-American, pro-Palestinian, anti-capitalist group. And that, as you just heard there, they were actively planning an attack. They had the ingredients to do so. They went out with the intent to set up these bombs. This is when the arrest was made. And so they're going to be appearing in court later today. So more on that and whether or not that group sort of rises to the level of, wait a minute, it's not just these 4 people in California or perhaps even a 5th, that this is a much larger apparatus. That's what we're going to be watching for. Well, how big is this group? What do we need to know about this group? And whether it's just this particular attack or is there other things planned? So just something to put on your radar. Another tough story to add to the list of tough stories today, but wanted to make sure you were aware of that. Let me just stay out in California just for a moment before we go back to the East Coast and talk about what's been going on in Rhode Island and at Brown University. There was another sudden headline that came out on Sunday afternoon/evening where the police in Los Angeles were describing a double homicide that happened at a residence. And there were many reports swirling that this was the residence of Rob Reiner and his wife. Rob Reiner is a famous one-time actor, but longtime Hollywood director of movies that you likely know, and Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, and many, many others. And it still has not been, at this point, what's been very interesting about this investigation, I want to be very clear about this. The family of Rob Reiner and others, including the mayor of Los Angeles and many high-profile actors and those that are connected to Hollywood, have commented on the passing of Rob Reiner. So when his family comes out and issues a statement, we're going to listen to that it was Rob Reiner and his wife who were both found dead. And the early reporting is suggesting that these were stab wounds and that there was a family member that found them in the house. I'm not dismissing what the law enforcement is doing here. What I am saying is that this is interesting that we're getting all this information, but not getting it confirmed by law enforcement. And I was really waiting for that because that's what we want. We want an official word from those that are investigating this crime. But apparently there were some things happening behind the scenes. And we got a little bit more news this morning. Instantly, there were reports that this crime was due to the son of Rob Reiner. One of his sons has been in and out of homelessness and rehab. And in fact, they even worked on a project together, a semi-biographical story about a son and a father that are going through this tumultuous time together. So instantly reports are coming out about that. But still, we weren't getting a lot from law enforcement. Now we learned from law enforcement that there was that the son was in custody, essentially was in custody overnight. They weren't being clear about that, and that he is being detained for this particular crime. And so I expect that we'll get more on the record today, but certainly a devastating story, and one that, especially around the holidays for a family, is the worst of the worst news. So there will be more on that. We just aren't getting a lot from law enforcement at this moment. And it was a difficult press conference to watch last night because one of the questions from journalists, and kudos to the journalists for asking this, which is, wait a minute, what about the threats to the community here? What about that? You're telling us no one's in custody. There's no persons of interest, investigation. Like, what's going on here? And I don't know what that has to do with this son being found or being brought into custody, but clearly there were some things happening behind the scenes. I also would just mention this. This is just unfortunately um, from personal experience. I One of the ways that or catalysts that pushed me into really chasing my dreams as a journalist was I witnessed the death of a patron at a large club that I was the director of operations of. I was not doing exactly what I wanted to out of college, but I really enjoyed this space. I worked my way through college as in operations of a large fitness facility, and I was working at one after college. It was like a private club that had fitness and a little bit of something extra, sort of like a country club without a golf course. Anyways, one of our beloved members passed away suddenly, an older man, and it was shocking. And this wasn't the first or last time that I experienced this, unfortunately. And what I will tell you is that there is someone that passes away before law enforcement gets to the scene. So there's nobody responding medically. There's no one obviously there thinking something bad is going to happen, homicide or otherwise. There's steps that have to take place for the coroner to come in, for the family to do the work that they need to do, to get the information that they need to do. That's perspective I wouldn't have without this experience. And as I was listening to the detective that was giving some more insight into the lack of information they were providing the public and saying he's waiting on a warrant, he's waiting on the coroner, that rang true to me as someone that has experienced that. And you have to wait. You have to wait on a few different things before you can remove a body, before you can start making plans for the family. And it was a tough lesson to learn, but I add that perspective as there are some things that seem a little bit off, as the police weren't totally being transparent with journalists, but there's also this other side that when you show up to a crime scene and you already are dealing with those that have passed, it's different than a crime scene where you're removing people to the hospital. And so perhaps that came into play as well. Speaking of persons of interest or lack thereof, I want to take us back to Rhode Island and what transpired there over the weekend, which still in many ways remains a mystery. There's no person of interest in custody. There's no person of interest being described to the public. There's not a drawing. There's not a description other than a man in black was the person that committed this crime, opening fire in one of the buildings on the campus of Brown University, killing 2, injuring others, and fleeing out the door. We don't have a lot of more information beyond that. Yesterday, we got news that there was a person of interest, that they were being questioned. But then very late last night, suddenly that changed. And I want you to hear some of the back and forth. This is with the mayor. So you're going to hear Brett Smiley. He's the mayor of Providence where this took place. You're also going to hear from the Rhode Island Attorney General, Peter Nerona. He's going to be the one answering questions at the end. So let's just take a listen here for a moment.
We will be releasing the person of interest who had been detained earlier today. And the Attorney General can speak a little bit about the rationale for that. But we want to inform the community that that individual will shortly be released from Providence Police. We know that this is likely to cause fresh anxiety for our community. And we want to reiterate what we said earlier, which remains true, which is ever since the initial call, now a day and a half ago, we have not received any credible or specific threats to the Providence community. And so the status of safety in our community remains unchanged. And we believe that you remain safe in our community, though we will continue to have an enhanced police presence throughout the city and on the Brown campus.
This is what these investigations look like. I've been around long enough to know that sometimes you head in one direction and then you have to regroup and go in another. And that's exactly what has happened over the last 24 hours or so. Collectively, the team developed leads in a number of areas. One was chased to ground. It led to us detaining a person of interest. And so those words and how we choose those words when we're talking about an investigation matter. And what it means here is that certainly there was some degree of evidence that pointed to this individual, but that evidence needed to be corroborated and confirmed. And over the last 24 hours, leading into just very, very recently, that evidence now points in a different direction.
In a state where somehow, if you have a speeding ticket and a block camera or some other speeding camera to capture you, how you can have a position where there's hundreds of cameras in that immediate area, maybe thousands, in fact, I'd love to know how many. How is it possible not to have any other evidence threatening this? And this is ordinary Rhode Islanders reaching out to law enforcement, and they're confused by that. Quite frankly, some of them are terrified.
Well, look, there just weren't a lot of cameras in that Brown building. Is the reality? It's, you know, both of my kids were engineering students and were in that library a lot, class of 19 and class of 22. The reality is it's an old building attached to a new one. So there just isn't, Pat. I don't know what to tell you, but we're going to go out and find whatever evidence we can to solve this case as quickly as we can. I mean, we're not holding back video that we think would be useful. And I don't think I should even have to say it.
Well, I have a difference of opinion there with the Attorney General for the state of Rhode Island. If you have a murder that took place, you do need to talk to the public and the press when they're asking very basic questions in this highly digital age. We don't have any image. We don't have any description of anybody. There's nothing. Surely there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes from students. We're seeing that video. You likely are seeing viral video. We don't share a lot of it on Smarter News. I can't verify it. I know a lot of news organizations are happy to go with it. I just don't feel comfortable. I don't know sometimes how we can timestamp these videos. I don't know when they took place. And so unless we have a direct connection with someone that's involved in a crime like this, we're not going to be showing the viral video, but it's out there. And you'll see students that are taking video of what's happening. That all can be useful for police. And certainly it takes some time to go through that. So the questions, I mean, there's many questions here, which is, was this targeted? Was this a specific classroom? We don't really even have an understanding of how the gunman moved through the building. That hasn't been really discussed. We know of two people that were killed. We're just learning their identities now. We don't know about the others injured. Did they get a look at this person? Where can this person go? It's a residential area around the campus. So you have a lot of people coming in and off campus because it's finals. This is nerve-wracking. So there's two feelings, opposing feelings, and know that we heard from an official that says that he's been in office and doing this work for 3 decades. I haven't been a journalist for that long, but I have 2 decades under my belt. And I'll tell you this is rare to not have a little bit more information, any more information. Is the person tall? Is the person short? Did the person have a jacket on that was black? Did the person have something covering their face that was black? Like what, anything, any sort of morsel. The public can be very helpful in these situations. And we may be in a place where there's maybe not cameras inside this building, which is rare for any school at this time. But there could be cameras on the streets. So there could be a lot of digital data to look through. So I don't say this with trying to cast doubt on law enforcement, but I do think it's accurate to report from my experience that the lack of information here is surprising and unusual. And so when will we get a little bit more? What will that look like? Right now, no suspect, no person of interest, no description, no further details about the crime, and a public that's just waiting. Is the threat still here? That's scary. So now Brown University is letting students go home. They've suspended finals. So the campus will be quiet. But you're going to have a whole bunch of students that are returning to school in January. And what sort of information gathering can you do over the next few days to make that more plausible? So this is a big story just because it's unsolved at this time. And I wanted to make sure that I played the latest information from law enforcement and leaders in the community. Certainly, we believe everyone's doing their best, but let's be anxious for more, encouraging for more information as well. I just learned from the New York Times that the Los Angeles police chief said that Nick Reiner, he's the son of Rob Reiner, was booked for murder. And that he also added that the information at this stage was very limited on that, and that we do have the official identification. This is what police were waiting for from the coroner's office, that the two people killed in the Reiner's home were, in fact, Rob and Michelle Reiner. So that's important information. There was a little bit of time that it took to get that from LAPD, but now we have it on the record, and I wanted to share it with you. So, all right, deep breath here. Do you just want a little bit of something, something here? Just I got a little bit of something, something at the end. That has nothing to do with these unsolved crimes and these tough cases that we're trying to hold in our hands while we're figuring out the holiday plans, I'm sure, for our family and for work. I just want to mention to you really quickly, we got a whole smattering of headlines that are going to come your way from the U.S. government because it's catch up from the shutdown. So the news that we didn't get at the beginning of December, we're going to get now. So that could be related to inflation. It's related to jobs. It's a whole bunch of stuff that's getting pushed out before the holiday season. So if you see what feels like a lot of headlines related to the economy or other, so you kind of get these headlines alert that come across your phone. Just know that this is irregular and it's happening in a condensed time frame because all of this information was delayed because of the shutdown. Speaking of the shutdown, do lawmakers have a structure in place to negotiate their way out of their new deadline that kept the government funded until the end of January? The short answer is no. The other answer is there's been several ideas floated about these healthcare subsidies. The clock is ticking because lawmakers are going home for the holidays. And although the government is funded, so we're not going to have a shutdown deadline before the holidays, just know that when they come back in January, that's looming on the horizon. And in the meantime, you have Americans getting launched into their healthcare programs in January, seeing these higher prices. So as I referenced Chad Pergram before, a journalist I love to follow, as he's part of Fox News. He's one award-winning journalist, been on Capitol Hill for a long time, a reliable source of information. He had a really great essay. I should put it in the show notes for you because he basically says, this is how it's done, folks. This is everybody works into the last minute and they figure out a way through because they want to be home for the holidays and they don't want to worry about this. In the meantime, there's a lot of other people worried about this and wondering if Congress is going to find a way to, one, manage this healthcare subsidy issue. Are there creative solutions out there? And two, come together to actually have a funding bill that will fund the government. When we get into January 2026, we're going to be in a midterm election year. So every single member of the House of Representatives is up for re-election. You got a third of the Senate. You have a whole bunch of governors. It's an active election year. And people's personal calculations and loyalties suddenly start shifting a little bit depending on their poll numbers. So this makes things a little bit more interesting, perhaps, when you start seeing the dynamics at play for Congress. So just want you to know that. So that is taking place in Washington, D.C. Also, just want to note, weather, it has been a big issue across the country. We've seen some major flooding in the Pacific Northwest. We have not ignored that here at Smarter News. In fact, I've seen some amazing rescue videos by the Coast Guard in the Pacific Northwest helping people. And that may not be in your radar if you're not in part of that region. It's on our radar and something that we're going to continue to watch as we see this cold weather flow through the country. We had our first major snowfall in New York City. For those living in Colorado and Wyoming, Montana, you're wondering why the news is about New York City. That's just because it hasn't snowed as much in recent years, and the scenes coming from America's largest city just kind of make us feel like the holidays are here. So it's really a cultural experience when you get snow in New York City. I can attest to that. It's amazing for the first few hours. And then it becomes just dirty snow. And then you just really hope you have a good pair of boots and a good coat. If you have those two things, you get through just about anything in life, folks. So That is spoken as a one-time New Yorker. One-time New Yorker, always New Yorker? I feel like I am, but, you know, I'll leave it to the native New Yorkers for that. I'm gonna leave you with 2 good news stories, okay? 2 good news stories. One is from Dick Van Dyke. Dick Van Dyke is one of the most famous actors in American history. He started out in, comedy, movies. He's done a little bit of everything, quite frankly, and he turned 100. And because he's spry and still funny at 100, he has a lot of interest in him because we wanna know, how do you do it? Like, what is the deal? I was looking at a workout routine he did a couple years ago. He had a whole bunch of, ab crunches and core exercises that I definitely could not do, but he was doing his late 90s. So just putting it out there, we should all start doing some ab exercises to deal with the stress of the holidays if we want to be like Dick Van Dyke. This was a funny anecdote, though. How did he get his start? It's attached to the Christmas season. Apparently, he was 4 or 5 years old, and he was cast in a Christmas pageant at his church. And do you want to know what role he had? He was the baby Jesus. And apparently he made some sort of, smart aleck remark. And the whole congregation started to laugh. And he said, you know what? I like the sound of that. And that started his career looking to entertain people. So Dick Van Dyke, one-time baby Jesus in a church festival. So you know what? Maybe we should not shrug our shoulders, roll our eyes when we are being asked to go to one more performance for our children. I'm not speaking for personal experience. You do you. But I was at 2 performances on Friday. You never know. All right. You never know what you're witnessing could be the beginning of the next great American entertainer. So that's what I'm going to keep in my back pocket as we go through a variety of different Christmas events over the next the next week or so. And finally, here, I just want to share this with you. This soundbite will play you out because it's a good way for us to just take a breath and sort of have a palate cleanser with that heavy news and going into certainly a busy week for you. The Heisman Trophy was handed out over the weekend. This is the highest honor in American college football. And this is always a really fun event to tap into, even if you're not a football fan, because the stories of these kids are just incredible. And in fact, I need to make sure that I have it here live. I just realized that maybe I haven't dropped it to myself yet. I had a whole lot of video and didn't want to. There we go. It's going to come in here for a second for you. Just give me one moment. Anyhow, this is a great story because Fernando Mendoza, when you look at him now, this young college quarterback for Indiana, he looks like the quintessential quarterback. He's 6'5", strong, handsome. He's got that great $1 million smile. He's leading his team. The team loves him. He seems like he seems like he's got everything going for him, which in many ways he does. But the story that he tells in his speech, because he is the Heisman Trophy winner this year, is a story that really can resonate with so many of us, no matter our age or what we've chosen to do in life. He talks about how he really wanted to quit football in the 4th grade. He didn't like it. He was way like not a priority player. And his parents said, no, listen, you started it. You're going to finish it. And he said that really kept him into football, even during the tough times, even during the pandemic, which was brought up here. And I think is really important. We forget these young adults were so affected by the pandemic. And for someone like him who was hoping to get these scholarships, to not have football, to not be able to play sports depending on the school, really was a change in trajectory for them. And he didn't really have a lot of people interested in him. Well, now he's won the highest award for college football in the land. And he talks specifically about what that took. But he also talks specifically about his family. And he talked about his mom. He talked about his dad. He talked about his brothers. He talks about his coaches. But it's the comments about his mother. So quickly, the backstory here to this is his mother was a college tennis player, an athlete herself. And he says that she taught him how to throw. And she said, well, it was just a tennis exercise. I wanted him to play tennis. It turns out he was going to play football. And she didn't share with her children a diagnosis that she had 18 years ago with MS, multiple sclerosis, which is a degenerative disease. So you will see her in most pictures now in a wheelchair. She has this bright electric smile. And that's what you notice first. But maybe after this, you may notice that she's in a wheelchair. So he, again, addresses all his family members, but it was a little bit different with his mom. And I thought you would appreciate this and also appreciate his words of encouragement. at the end here. So here is Fernando Mendoza receiving the Heisman Trophy.
By high school, I was chasing the first stages of pipe dream to play in college. Then COVID hit, cut the season short. The result, I was only a 2-star prospect, I only had 1 scholarship offer. But my family's unconditional love and belief kept me going and pushed me forward. These are the people who built me long before football did. Mommy, this is your trophy as much as it is mine. You've always been my biggest fan. You're my light, you're my why, you're my biggest supporter. Your sacrifices, courage, love, those have been my first playbook and the playbook that I'm gonna carry through my side through my entire life. You taught me that toughness doesn't need to be loud. It can be quiet and strong. It's choosing hope. It's believing in yourself when the world doesn't give you much reason to. Together, you and I are rewriting what people think is possible. I love you. I want every kid out there who feels overlooked, underestimated to know I was you. I was that kid too. I was in your shoes. The truth is, you don't need the most stars, hype, or rankings. You just need discipline, heart, and people who believe in you. And you need to believe in your own abilities. I hope this moment shows you that chasing your dreams are worth it, no matter how big or impossible they seem. God bless. Go Hoosiers. Thank you guys all.
All right, are we all crying? Or we just need to let it out? Let it out, guys. Let it out. When he says, mommy, you're like, okay, hit me with it, kid. What are you going to say next? But this was a really special speech. It's been widely reviewed that way because he talked about everybody else, really besides himself, unless it was at the end talking about how he kept going in these times that seemed very uncertain. So there are wonderful messages around us all the time, even when the news can be difficult. And we want to make sure to weave those in because it's all part of the collective story. So again, I'll put the entire speech in show notes. It's 6 minutes. It's worth it. And we'll keep you updated on these other developing stories as well. In the meantime, have a great week. Thank you for your support of quick, concise, nonpartisan news. And we'll see you with more on smarternews.com. Have a great day, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Thank you for believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. Every time you join us or share or save our content, you help us build a solution in news, and we are so grateful. We have a few other ways you can support our mission, from joining our insider community Scoop, to shopping our gear at our Smarter Shop, to just telling a friend. The best way to do any of this is to visit smarternews.com or follow us at Smarter News on social media. Don't worry, we put all of this in the captions so it's easy for you. Plus, we added our email just in case you want to drop us a note. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for helping us deliver news smarter.